I just wanted to say that land grabbing and land are really pertinent issues. Obviously, they're pertinent because people live on these lands and are violently thrown off of them. But land and greens are not the only things being grabbed. There's a lot of grabbing going on depending on the scale, both spatial, temporal, that you look at. And what I wanted to bring up was that the Occupy movement, which is an activist movement, I think its brilliance is in its ability to see the public nature of many things. The nature of non-nature, the public nature of finance, the public nature of streets and places, and to claim them as objects of public decision-making and of public good. And I'd like to come back to public, because that, I think, is really critical. It is the space of activism. It's the space that when the very basis, the material basis of wealth is grabbed, that is the space that's enclosed and diminished. It's the space of representation and democracy. These are spaces that we see shut down by the very impoverishment of people who don't even have the means to actually resist in many occasions, and who do oftentimes, and in representative governments that no longer have the means to respond to people's need and act because of this merging that Shalmani spoke about of corporation and of the public. And I'll tell one very quick story. I was just in Rio this summer at Rio Plus 20. I was also just there a very short 20 years ago. And the difference was stark. 20 years ago at the People's Forum, I was there with all kinds of people. Bella Abzug, who I saw almost in a fist fight with Vandana Shiva. All kinds of intellectuals, all kinds of activists were there. It was a happening space. It was where all the discussion was going on. The government negotiations were 20 kilometers away in an isolated fortress, which a very few select outsiders had access to. This time, the People's Forum was a shambles. It was disorganized. There were indigenous peoples dressed up for tourists who did not know what the meeting was about and were there to sell knickknacks. And most of the activists were elsewhere. I had a panel there called Occupy Nature that was a lot of fun, very interesting discussions. But most of the people there were actually, there were Stalinists there. There were all kinds of very strange marginal groups as well. But anyone who had any money was over in the main forum. And the main forum looked like a shopping mall with World Wildlife Fund, with the IUCN, with the government of Britain, with the government of the United States. All of these governments had stalls that looked like the ones that the NGOs had, and with corporations, Shell Corporation, all on equal footing, all in one forum. It had merged. And what came out of it was a pledge. We know these pledges never come to be, and they aren't what they seem, for $513 billion for environment. That's almost 5 times the global flow of international development aid. And even big chunks of that were pledged by corporations. And many corporations are actually there to grab these elements. They are really now, if you look at international development aid, it is bidded out in a way that speaks of markets. And I'd like to propose that, like many of the things we're looking at, these are fictive commodities. Development aid is a fictive commodity in the Polanyian sense of a fictive commodity, which is something that is produced, but not produced perhaps to be marketed and commodified, but not for commodification, not for the market, and not by the market, and therefore the fiction of a self-regulating market doesn't apply to these items, which means that the market will not self-regulate and will grab and consume and overconsume. And I think we need to look at things like risk, like nature, which Polanyi identified, land as part of nature for Polanyi, finance, and even markets themselves as fictive commodities. And I say that in the sense that the transparency, the idea behind the transparency is that information is the luminiferous ether of the market. I'm sorry, since when? When there really aren't markets. Look at these markets. They are private property. Markets themselves are owned. Where I work, markets are owned. And I think we have to look out and back off from land fundamentalism and focus in the sense that while land might be important in many places, where I work it isn't. It's very low value. And empires were not built on the control of land or territory. They were built on the control of long-distance trade. This is West Africa, Senegal, the trans-Saharan trade. And the control over trade, I think today, and of things like development aid, and of governance itself, whatever that means, are new fictive commodities, and it will be very rich for us to look into these and to explore them as productive arenas of investigation. Anyhow, with that said, as preface, we have a panel of 5 fabulous speakers who will have 10 minutes each, and I would like to say to you that you can come up here or sit at the table. I will flash this red card when 10 minutes are up. And we're going to go in order of, since we've kind of had, with Shalmani and me saying a few things, two speakers already of this big ideas notion, I'll have 2 people, the first 2 come up and speak, and we'll have some discussion, and then the 3 next speakers in the order that's been given. The first speaker in the group, and I am not going to introduce anyone since you all know these wonderful people. The first speaker is Melissa Leach. So Melissa, the floor is yours. I'll name everybody. Lorenzo Cuciola, Sam Moyo, Eric Holtz Jimenez, and Tanya Lee are the speakers. And so Melissa, it's all yours.